Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you in this Thursday afternoon to join us on the Sopa Media Insiders webinar. Today, we're focusing on the best environment reporting stories. And my name is Kwangyin Liu Kwangyin from Taiwan's CommonWealth Magazine, 天下杂志. So it's my pleasure to welcome you today. So I'm a senior writer and the English website editor of CommonWealth Magazine. I have worked at the magazine since 2012. I cover the automotive industry, climate, environment, energy, among other topics. And just before we start with the speakers today, I would like to remind you a few things, the house rules. So during the webinar, feel free to post questions anytime in the Q&A. I will try my best to answer them at the end of the session. And if you want to do live tweets, please tweet using the following hashtags: hashtag Sopa Awards 2021, hashtag Sopa Talks, and mention Sopa Asia. And in case you missed the session today or you want to revisit it, we have the recorded discussion that will be made available on the YouTube channel sometime next week. And I'm very happy to announce that CommonWealth Magazine and as well as Google News Initiative are co-organizers of today's event. So just before we start with our first speaker for today, I would like to say a few remarks on why environment reporting is so important now more than ever. So why do we talk about the environment at all? Because our home is on fire, literally. Just 2 weeks earlier, the latest IPCC report on climate change grabbed headlines again by sounding an alarm for all humanities. According to the report, global warming, or shall we say global heating, is dangerously close to spiraling out of control. The report warns that the world is already certain to face climate disruptions for decades, if not for centuries to come. Once in 100 years, climate events such as extreme heat waves, flooding, or drought are now happening every decade, if not every year, in more places than ever across the globe. The situation is getting worse, and that's why we need more attention on environmental coverage than ever. Which is why I'm very proud to be joined today by two excellent environment reporters who have dedicated years covering environmental issues across Asia, giving voice to the rivers, the mountains, and sometimes the animals that couldn't speak for themselves. So I'm very proud to introduce our first speaker of the day, Shibani Mahtani. She grew up in Singapore and she's the Southeast Asia and Hong Kong bureau chief for the Washington Post, covering 10 countries from the Philippines to Myanmar. And her multimedia story, How China is Choking the Mekong, is the Award of Excellence winner at this year's Sopa Award, Excellence in Reporting on the Environment in the Global category. So let us welcome Shibani, and she will take 5 minutes to talk about her story. Shibani, please take it away.
Yep. Thank you so much. And also thank you to Sopa for organizing this panel today, and also for honoring all of our work on the environment. So I cover the countries of Southeast Asia, and while people always talk about the South China Sea as being a major geopolitical or security issue for the countries in the region, especially in their relationship with China, I think the focus has sort of shifted away from just the South China Sea to understanding more how the Mekong kind of plays into this dynamic as well. The Mekong River is a lifeblood for this region, especially for the countries through which the river directly flows through, which is Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And we sought to kind of understand how China's dam building and also the dam building of countries, including Thailand as well as Laos, was affecting all the communities, the 60 million people that directly depend on the biodiversity, the fishing supplies, and just life along that river. Laos is one of the most underreported and hard to get to and hard to access countries in the region that I cover. It's a region where it's very, very hard to find, willing local journalists because the risk for them is so high in a very tightly controlled, one-party state communist country. There are not many foreign media outlets at all who've operated there, and actually most people, even who I know covered Southeast Asia, have barely taken any trips to Laos. So I think that was a challenge that really attracted us to looking at this region, especially because it is on China's doorstep, and it is a country that is so reliant on China and infrastructure projects, for its survival, because that's the way its whole economy is run. And so, we were researching a lot of the tributaries of the Mekong, and we settled on doing our project and our investigation in the Nam U River. And that's a series of tributaries that run through Laos, and there are the cascading dams along that river, 7 different dams, all built and completed within the last few years, all coming on board now. So we decided that the way we would do this would be really sort of on the ground immersive reporting. I mean, I think one of the things we found, and I'm curious to hear, my other panelists' experience about that, but sometimes it's so hard to make an environment story, real to people as something that's like tangible, that they can touch, they can feel, and they can see. And so that was why we took this multimedia approach, because we really wanted people to live the experience of the people living on those tributaries. So yeah, I think if you could just go to the next slide. We really wanted, through visual, photography, and actually all of this was shot and filmed by an incredible photojournalist, also from Singapore, who knows the region very, very well. Took many, many trips to the Mekong and Laos in this region. We shot all this on film because we really wanted to, make this as immersive and as visual as possible. So you can see here, like between, these beautiful karst mountains, this, rich, lush area, these dams sort of coming up like huge mammoth structures, kind of disrupting the flow of the river. And the whole ecosystem had sort of changed, right? Like you used to be able to journey sort of uninterrupted down from the top of the Nam U down to the bottom, which is where it cuts with Luang Prabang. But you just can't do that anymore. And so that's the river journey that we tried to replicate. We basically tried to do what people would have done and communities would have done, and access the river the way they would have before these dams, and found ourselves, hitting the dams and understanding the changes through this kind of like firsthand immersive reporting. We took sound along the video, so contrasting a lot of the peaceful river sounds and communities and birds and pigs and roosters and ecosystems, with the drilling and the harsh sounds of the dam construction. I think what's so interesting, because the Nam U tributary is pretty high up. It really has had this cascading, impact down, not through only Laos, but the countries below it. And actually, it's been quite a long time since we reported the story, but the situation in the Mekong is only getting worse, much worse actually, with very unstable water supplies. And the villages that we speak to say that they have absolutely no way to predict, right? The water levels of the river every few months will change because of sort of the whims of when the dams are sort of turned on and off by Chinese engineers. And I think that's the thing that we sort of realize the most, right? I mean, these fluctuating rivers are not just about water levels or something, static, but it's about everything. It's about fishing, it's about security, it's about people's homes being washed away or dried up. And these are communities that are agrarian. I mean, they survive on this, and they have for a really, really long time. I think next slide. Yeah, and so the haphazard sort of water levels, that is a problem that's only increased further down in Cambodia, the Tonle Sap River, which is a major source for fish, which is a major source of protein for Cambodia, has not done the thing it does every season, where it basically reverses its flow and the fish come in, which is when people are able to fish and survive off that. But that hasn't happened this season, and all of these patterns are getting far more predictable, right? Far more unpredictable. I think also with the pandemic, hunger is raging through Southeast Asia, and these are communities that have been so badly ravaged both by the lack of tourism, because Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam were all highly dependent on tourism, and now their food resources, their income flow is so much more scarce than it ever was. So I think really environmentalists have said this for a long time, but we're at a tipping point more than we've ever been here, and of course this also sort of dovetails into the relationship that Southeast Asian countries have with China, because a lot of this is sort of controlled and managed by Chinese developers, and Chinese developers who are behind these dams, and who are controlling when the dams open and close, and when the waterways change. And I think that is also going to become a major source of security tensions. Laos, more than any other country, is so indebted to China, will not be able to pay off the debts that they've taken on from building these massive projects. And I think there's a lot of questioning in the region, especially among local communities, of was this worth it? Do we see any benefit from Belt and Road? And yeah, I think that's.
Wow, thank you, Shibani. That's really a lot to take in. So of course I have a few questions, but I'm going to ask them later. I'm very curious, why were the dams built in the first place? Was the main purpose to generate power, and who or what industry or what companies is that power for? And what alternative do you see in this? But of course, you can take this time to think about the answers, and we will get to a Q&A session later. So our next speaker is Tina Xu. She's the editor of The World of Chinese, 汉语世界. It's a magazine in English. She is interested in interactive storytelling. So you could also see her work in Hong Kong Free Press, the Bangkok Post, Outriders, and Modern Painters, among other publications. She is currently working on a documentary about trauma and migration, which I'll be very interested in learning more if we have time later. Her story, China's Hidden Rural Waste Crisis, is the Award of Excellence winner at this year's Sopa Award, Excellence in Reporting on the Environment in the Regional category. So let's welcome Tina. You have 5 minutes to go through your story, please.
Thank you so much, Kwangyin, and thanks to SOPA for giving us the platform to share our work. And I'm very honored to be speaking alongside veteran journalists Shibani and Kwangyin. So the story for Idea on China's rural waste crisis, I would say, came about in 2019 when waste management had become this kind of national campaign and buzzword in China. So the internet was filled with memes about Shanghai's waste sorting rules, like how many bins you need to sort 1 cup of milk tea into, or facial recognition cameras to find the culprits of improper sortings. And all these kinds of high-tech solutions in urban contexts that our editor Hattie at The World of Chinese really encourages us to try to look beyond. So outside of China's cities, we found that waste management looks very different. And Kwangyin, could you go to the next slide, please? So when we arrived in Hoanzhuang village, we were greeted by open-air dumping pits that were in use until just 4 years ago, when waste management had just become a concept like in nearly 4/5 of Chinese villages. At the same time, rural areas are becoming besieged by urban trash. So the last few decades have given rise to these mega landfills like this one outside of Shenzhen that collapsed in 2015 and buried an area equivalent to 60 football fields and killed over 70 people. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kwangyin. So that's one reason why the government has been turning towards waste incineration plants. However, in China, incinerators are still very controversial. So incinerators are more efficient in terms of space and can even generate some electricity as a byproduct. But crucially, they can also emit these harmful dioxins and other toxins into the air if they're not built with expensive yet safer technology or operated and managed properly. So the public woke up to these dangers in 2008 when a baby was born in a village just 190 meters from a plant. And mind you, the regulatory distance is 300 meters, and the baby developed cerebral palsy and epilepsy. In the same village, cancer rates spiked. Villagers reportedly dragged their dying livestock to the plant's gates, demanding compensation. And in the years since, there have been a handful of street protests in cities where incinerator projects are announced, like 10,000 people on the streets in Wuhan in 2019, as well as a crowd in Hangzhou in 2014 that actually left 10 participants and 29 policemen injured. All this goes to show a deficit of trust that the plants will be built or managed well enough to not put the health of the nearby communities on the line. So Kwangyin, next slide, please. Thank you. So in the vein of solutions journalism, we at the World of Chinese sought to explore these innovative and effective approaches to this looming problem of growing waste. So back to Hoanzhuang, this village is under the municipality of Xingtai, which is ranked #1 in China's list of most air polluted cities in 2013 and has actually been on the top 10 list every single year since then. And when I was there personally, I never saw any blue in the sky. And around half of the cities on this list each year are from Hebei province. So while we were there, we accompanied Chen Liwen, who is a Hebei native and the founder of the NGO Zero Waste Village. And you can see her in the picture furthest on the right, speaking to school children as she worked with the village government to implement a new waste sorting system. So a little bit of background on the system. First, all the public bins were taken away, so each family is accountable for their own bins. And then she hosted a town hall, and she went literally door to door to follow up with the villagers, tracking their performance on their correct sorting on a clipboard. And in one area, the county government even offered a cash bonus to the village that had the best performance in trash reduction. And although these methods sound very simple, actually Chen's efforts, she found, could reduce waste production in certain villages by around 50%. And this is because around half of household waste in China is kitchen waste that can be separated for compost. And that's important because this large proportion of wet kitchen waste in Chinese trash is one of the reasons why these incinerators have trouble reaching the 850 degrees that they have to reach in order to eliminate the dioxins when burning. So separating out kitchen waste and wet trash actually makes burning the trash much safer. So Chen shared with us some lessons on how villages are essentially a society of acquaintances and how to actually influence their behavioral changes to create a strong social contract between the municipality and the community. So last slide, please. Okay, thanks, Kwangyin. So finally, my colleague Jia Chengli and I also traveled with Zhang Jingming of Wuhu Ecology Center in Anhui Province as he drove around with a small team to different industrial parks in the area to monitor pollution by flying a drone overhead to look for discharges. And Zhang Jingming shared with us stories of industry often responding hostilely to their attempts to act essentially as citizen watchdogs, even facing threats of violence, to report their illegal pollution to the local branch of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. But after reporting the problems, they will often be officially investigated and sometimes actually solved. So he shared with us this immediate kind of watchdog role that they do, as well as the tools that they use to try to impact policy. So they push incinerators to share their emissions data publicly in line with the law, which is essentially hundreds of phone calls, as well as they write briefs for representatives of China's National 2 sessions. So Zhang Jingming noted very proudly that one representative quoted one of their briefs at the meeting, meaning that their ideas are possibly being considered in a small bottom-up window of the political process. So in summary, our piece dissects burgeoning waste not only as a technological problem, but largely as a management, governance, and transparency problem that requires cooperation across all levels of government, from national down to village governments, as well as industry and civil society, and where the consequences are still most often borne, like in most countries where incinerators exist, including the United States, by the rural and the poor. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Tina. And you you did manage to control the time really well. So thank you for that. Yes, I will. I also have a few questions for Tina, and I'm very interested in the solution journalism. I like the hashtags you used, and I'm particularly interested in how the activists managed to convince the villagers to reduce waste. You said the household waste can be reduced by 50%. So we will go back to you in the Q&A session about that. So, okay. And now let's introduce our third speaker. So that is me. And my name is Kwangyin, senior writer at CommonWealth Magazine. My cover story, Solar Power Fat Cats, won the honorable mention at this year's Sopa Awards, Excellence Reporting on the Environment in the Chinese Language category. And this photo you're looking at shows what was once a mountainous area in Miaoli, northern Taiwan, home to an endangered animal called leopard cats, 石虎. The shot was taken with a drone. And the area you're looking at has been leveled to make way for solar panels. So when we visited the site, there are a lot of bulldozers and trucks running around, roaming the hills, and just construction was in action. And what you could see are satellite images spanning 3 years. So how did we find out about the hill you were just looking at? So we used 2 sets of data. One is a public record of solar farm applications released by the local government. They were actually on the government's website. Another set of data is not so publicly available. So we were able to obtain satellite images spanning several years, just like the ones you're looking at right now, to document the destruction in progress. So from here, you could see what was once a forest was wiped out over the course of several years. So the local environmental groups that we talked to, they were very concerned about the living environment of the endangered leopard cats, because these cats, they love residing in the woods. And we were also shocked to find that there were over 200 solar farm applications in the county, which has 85% of its total area covered by mountains and trees. And luckily, after our story broke, the local government immediately decided to take an extra close look at these proposals. So I just did some research and found out in May this year, the government approved only 90 of these projects out of 220 applications. Some of them are in progress right now. And the last slide was to explain we are not interested in only showing what's happening, but why. So let's start by saying that Taiwan has a very ambitious goal to increase renewable energy in its energy mix from the current 5% to 20% by 2025. And that is going to be achieved mainly with building offshore wind farms and solar farms. But as you could imagine, that Taiwan's land area is very limited, and it's a very small island. Over 70% of the land is mountains. It's actually not so easy to find large pieces of land for huge solar farms, like you could very easily do in Australia or the US. So to achieve this, the solar farm developers are scrambling to find land, and the government is eager to encourage the solar power with favorable feed-in tariff, which is if you build solar farms and you sell it to the state-owned utilities, you get a lot of money, to put it simply. So here in the graphics, you could see how much more money a landowner could make if he or she chooses to rent out the farmland to solar developers rather than farmers. So you could see that how much money can a landowner make if he's renting to, for example, a pineapple farmer. He's getting probably 1.2 thousand US dollars a year. If it's renting to a solar farm developer, the income would be more than tenfold. And what about the middlemen? So in these solar farm deals, there are also there are a lot of middlemen who are always on the lookout for lands where you can build solar panels. So they can get commission as high as 190,000 for a piece of land. So in the bottom, you could see the developer. If the developer, after 20 years of lease of land, chooses to sell this to another developer to build other things rather than the solar farm, they can make a lot of money. So it could be up to 335,000 if they resell the land to other developers. And not to mention, each year they could make 67,000 in feed-in tariff if they are just selling the electricity. So that's really a lot of difference. That's why we call this story Solar Power Fat Cats. And actually, my story was a little bit controversial because when the story broke, there was a debate of whether I or CommonWealth Magazine is against renewable energy, or maybe we're even pro-nuclear power, that we're bought off by the nuclear power people to say bad things about renewable energy. But the truth is, we believe in healthy and sustainable development of any infrastructure. And we believe that hasty development disregarding environmental impacts is never the right answer. So yeah, I would just like to end my presentation with this. And now it's time for the Q&A. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, so I would like to ask you a few questions, Tina and Shibani. So please remember the participants of the webinar, you can type in your questions at the Q&A box. I will try my best to answer them after I have asked a few questions. So my first question would be for Shibani about the Mekong River dam story. When I was listening to your presentation, I had this question in my mind. So what are these dams for? Are they for power, and what is that power intend to do, and who's benefiting from that?
Yeah, I mean, even when I was watching your presentation, I think there's some sort of overlap between the themes here, right? Of this idea that, you know, there are sources of energy that are typically considered good or clean, you know, renewable, it's not nuclear, it's not coal, but end up being, you know, much more destructive to the environments because of just very thoughtless and, you know, careless planning, right? But yeah, to sort of go back to, you know, directly answer your question, you know, I think Laos, you know, had this ambition or this aim of becoming the quote unquote battery of Asia, because it was aware that all these rivers flew through the country, and, you know, between Thailand and China, right, they both had immense energy needs. And so, you know, it was both the you know, the communist government's their like strategy and plan to kind of start, you know, essentially selling the contracts for dam building across all these rivers, and it coincided, right, with like all this massive development in China and also in Thailand. So those are basically the two major places where that energy is going. I think something that was very interesting, which, you know, through researching this project and also you know, other projects in the region, I found out that when China planned to build a lot of these dams, back decades ago, actually, Yunnan had very, very low electrification rate, but since then it caught up so massively that by the time they finished building the dams, there was surplus power anyway in China. And so then there was a question of, okay, I mean, we're going to go through with this, but where is this energy actually going to go? Do we need it? Do we really need the electrification levels that we're sort of building and planning for, right? And I think that was the thing that it seemed like when they started planning this stuff, they just kind of committed to it rather than sort of questioning what are the current electrical needs of our own provinces, of Thailand, of Laos, and that wasn't really done.
Mm. Yeah, so because when I was reading your story, I was asking myself, does Laos need a lot of power, or maybe it's needed by Thailand, or maybe China? But you raised a good point, because all these big infrastructure plans, the planning started maybe even decades ago. So when the circumstances change, can they really adapt really quickly to reflect the changing demands? I think that's really a very interesting question. And again, Shibani, I'm really interested in the way you tell the story. And just because we have never been to River Mekong, so could you give us a sense of what it was like to travel along or on in the river? How long does it take to go from to do the story that you did, and what was it like to ride in the boat? And
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that was really the kind of experience we wanted to deliver to our readers, so they will understand, what's going to be lost, right, when all these ecosystems start disappearing. So as I mentioned in the opening, Laos is very, very hard to access, and one of the challenges was, we couldn't bring our phones in. We couldn't do anything to identify ourselves as being journalists, and so I had to leave my Washington Post phone with the Washington Post email and everything, at home, back in Hong Kong. So it really felt like an off-the-grid experience in its totality, right? Because we were on this boat. I barely had internet. The photographer I was with was shooting on film. It felt like we really took a step back, and I think that sort of allowed us to sort of tell the story in the way that we did, and try to portray the sort of peace and calm and quiet and sort of the majestic beauty of this place, right? And help people really understand tangibly what happens when environments get destroyed and ruined. So
did you just say you were tourists, or?
Yes, I mean, the plan was, if anybody asked us, we would say we were tourists, and we were just traveling through. I think that the difficulty obviously was then approaching, communities and villages, especially because it's very sensitive with local journalists there, right? So we had to kind of act sort of dumb when we approached them, but then through conversations we would explain what we were doing and tell them that obviously we wouldn't use their name or anything identifiable, but we just wanted to understand the impact of these changes in the environment on them. And actually kind of we didn't have as many problems as we anticipated. We thought it would be much harder to do the kind of reporting we wanted to do, but we found villages were very open to talking about the change of their communities. But that's why you'll see in the piece, there are not a lot of people directly quoted or characters that we sort of followed, because we just kind of met people along the way, just for safety and feasibility. But yeah, overall, if I remember, it took 3 days, and we stopped at different sort of hotels or guest houses along the way, and we had a local guide and a local driver, because obviously the whole complication that we experienced was what people experience every day, which is you can't take a boat through the dams, so you have to get off the boat, rent some kind of car, go all the way around, and then get back on the river and keep going, right? So in that way, we also got to observe the dam building and sort of the ecosystem, including of the workers, right? The Chinese workers, that and the communities and how they sort of interacted with the Laotian communities was pretty interesting too.
Wow, it must be some trip, and I'm really glad you're able to find villagers who are willing to share with you. But maybe it's because they didn't know that you were reporters, so that would have been really difficult. So my next question is for Tina. So I actually have a similar question. What why were you interested in the rural waste issue? What brought your attention on this? And also on the ground, how did you identify which village to go to? And was it hard to find people who would talk to you?
Mhm. So I think because the conversation around waste management in China is off, especially in English language news sources, tends to be very like heavily fixated on urban areas. So that's why at the World of Chinese, we were wondering what the situation looks like from the other side. At the same time, it's an issue that touches upon everybody's life and that we all create waste and it all goes somewhere. But the negative impacts of this waste treatment is not equally distributed. So I would hope that everyone reading can understand like where their waste goes and why it's important and whose health it directly impacts. The second part is I felt that so many stories about China, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, speak of the government as the kind of monolith. But I think this issue does well to show the complexity of the different layers of like government bureaus or locations or levels of government that are working on the issue from different angles. And then at the same time, you have like the manager of the Shenzhen waste pit who committed suicide after the collapse because it was known that he took bribes. And then on the other hand, you also have people like the village secretary in Hoanzhuang, who even though he retired, volunteers his time to go door to door with Chen Liwen in order to communicate these kinds of like new waste sorting rules. So I felt like it could, it's very rare to have a story that I feel like will present both of these angles in one place. And then thirdly, I feel like the story has room to show what civil society can do to contribute to solving this issue. So in our two cases, we had Chen Liwen at NGO Zero Waste Village and then Zhang Jingning at the Wuhu Ecology Center, where I felt like they actually found this very symbiotic relationship of how they can work in this very small space for civil society to be civically engaged. They found ways to kind of insert themselves into how the like system of incentives around them are running in order to like work with village governments to implement something on the ground, or to work with the local Ministry of Ecology and Environment to kind of be their eyes and ears on the ground and report illegal pollution.
Wow.
Yeah, so logistically, I suppose we were in contact with these individuals first, and then they invited us to go with them on the ground. And so we spent time with them, and we, because I think we were working with them, people were very open to speaking with us, whether it was the local government or the people who are working at the landfill, and they very openly shared even their statistics on like how the landfill is filling up before their estimates. And in general, I think people were relatively open.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really that's fantastic. But I'm also very interested in, there's one slide you were showing a child who was born with cerebral palsy. And it looks like you're trying to draw a connection between that illness to the nearby incinerator. And my experience of looking at or trying to do research on environmental impact on people's health, there's always a difficulty to try to draw connection, like causal relation. So how can you be sure that this illness was caused directly by the incinerator in the vicinity? So I'm just wondering, what kind of the discussions were involved?
Yeah, so in legal court, when this and another Beijing-based NGO called the Center for Legal Assistance of Pollution Victims, they worked with the family to sue the plant. And then that court case got a lot of media attention, which incited a lot of these kinds of debates. And then in the end, the plant was acquitted for inconclusive evidence. So as you said, it's very hard to prove this kind of direct cause and effect relationship. However, while they were collecting evidence for this legal court case, they did send people there with very like exact measurements, and they found that like, for example, the plant was built within the regulatory distance of 300 meters. It was 190 meters away. They found that they lacked some of the proper environmental licensing, and they found that the levels of these toxins were indeed very high in that area. So they found these things, but they were unable to say in a court of law that this was the cause and effect. But I think it was still in terms of public opinion and raising the issue to like a larger level of conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. I think the people's awareness and raising public opinion. I think that's one of the very important roles that environment journalism can play. You raise people awareness, you point out that there is a problem, even though you might not you might not have sufficient evidence linking the two, but you draw people's attention to this issue, and then maybe there will be action that follows. So let me take it back to Shibani. And so actually my coworker, when my coworker was doing stories in Vietnam and Thailand, my coworker went to Laos to see one of the dam projects, and I remember she telling me that the roads leading to the dams were so long, it took them the entire day in the van, and that was really difficult. So she had terrible car sick later that day. So could you name a few things that really impressed you during that reporting trip? It could be a conversation you had, or could be something that you witnessed.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it was definitely pretty grueling. On the whole thing about identifying as a journalist versus a tourist, I do want to clarify, when we spoke to the villages and stuff, eventually we told them what we were doing. We were just trying to like approach them in kind of a safe or covert way. I think the thing that I found really sort of memorable was actually talking, or not, I wasn't talking to them directly, but the photographer I was with speaks Mandarin and could communicate a lot with the overseas, Chinese workers that were there building all these projects. And I think sometimes there's so much focus on the local communities, and there should be, because these projects are highly disruptive to them and very damaging to the environment. But equally, I think a lot of the Chinese workers who are brought over from nearby provinces and stuff, they don't really understand why they're there, the value of their projects, or how to integrate, or how they should be dealing or living with this host country. And obviously there's a lot of animosity there between the different communities, right? I remember this very clearly, and there was one holdout, just one villager who refused to move from the site where they were building, I think, the Namu 3 dam. And he was the only one who didn't want to move to this like sort of model village that they had created. And there would be a lot of hostility between him and the Chinese workers, right? And different people from the company that was building it, which was Sino-Hydro, would like come over and tell him, we're raising your compensation, why wouldn't you move? We're raising it, why wouldn't you move? And there was a lot of anger there. But equally, like those people working for those companies are also just kind of following orders. I mean, they're not really sort of acting on kind of their own accord, nor do they see the value of really being away from their family and, being away from their provinces or their village, which I think was really sort of encapsulating to me of the whole sort of like Belt and Road endeavor, right? It just seems like in so many of these projects, both sides don't really understand it, the host country or the Chinese company embarking on it. And it really sort of makes you a sort of like question, the point of having these very large scale infrastructure projects, right? And a lot of it just seems like, as we discussed before, once something was planned decades ago and someone's approved it somewhere, it's too late to kind of pull it back, even when the reality on the ground changes.
Wow, that's a really interesting story. I think it also gets our attention on that sometimes there's really difference in scale when you talk about Belt and Road Initiative. It's very easy for us to think that we know what it is, but what does it mean on the ground level to the people who are directly involved and maybe impacted by the project? What does it mean for them? So it's really interesting story with the construction worker that you just shared. And and now I would like to ask Tina the same question. What are some of the things or some of the remarks that people make that really left an impression on you?
I think one of the moments that left a rather deep impression is a moment with Chen Liwen as she was giving a she was in a local school and she was speaking with the children there. And the reason is because in these villages, they're often considered hollow villages in that a lot of the working age people are out in the cities working. And so the people that you're actually depending on to do the waste separation is often like very young people and very old people. And so they also focus on schools as a site where they could teach children how to like recognize what the different kinds of waste are and what color bin they go into and things like that. But Chen Liwen, she opened her lecture by asking the children a series of questions. And one of the questions was, what color is the sky? And then everyone choruses, white. I think that took me a little bit by surprise, and that it's something that like it, I guess, forces you to think that there's an entire generation of young people in this elementary school who are growing up without access to something that I personally take for granted.
Yeah. So that's really, I think that's really a powerful observation and question. And since you're talking about Chen Liwen, I was very curious when you said that Chen Liwen was able to convince the villagers to change the way they sorted garbage to reduce as much as 50% of waste. What are some of the ways that she was able to achieve that? I'm really eager to know.
So I think the largest part of it is probably just like good old-fashioned patience and kindness, in that she will go door to door. And so the waste can be reduced 50% because 50% of it to begin with is food waste. So a lot of it is just kitchen waste, like scraps, like the peels of different like fruits or vegetables. But usually they all get grouped together and then they all go to a landfill or trash incinerator. But in this case, you can separate half and send it to a local compost, which is also important for, like, as I said earlier, reducing the wetness of the overall trash so that the incinerators can reach the degree necessary to not emit toxins. And so when I went around with them, so every morning she would leave with the trash collection vehicle, which is like an electric rickshaw with a few bins on the back. And then it's a team of the driver, the former village secretary, and Chen Liwen. And they'll go door to door with a clipboard, like checking off whether or not that family has disposed of their trash and then whether or not it's sorted correctly. So if it's not done correctly, then she will like put something and then spend time like re-explaining, like, grandma, like, remember that this peel is compostable and things like that. And then over time, so she will go morning after morning until everyone can do it completely correctly. I think she's also said that it depends on, like, this, again, the system of incentives. So it depends a lot on having the local village secretary invested in the project and willing to go door to door, because he has a lot of social capital in that community. And she has said that if she just comes in as an outsider and tries to tell people, hey, like, separate your trash like this, no one is going to necessarily like follow her instructions. So having the local government as a stakeholder is very important.
Yeah, so you have the local government and you have the authority, and also I think infrastructure is also very important, because you would need some compost facility ready in place and really easily accessible for people to use that. And then you have the carrot and stick strategy. Maybe that's one of the ways that you can achieve that. So we have a little bit more than 10 minutes before we close the session, and I already see a few questions come up in the Q&A box. So I think I'll just take questions from here. So we have Marianne Bray, who asked a question for Shibani and Tina. And actually for Shibani, that was also the question I set out to ask you. So because your story was written last year, actually 1.5 years ago, what's happened since the story was written? What's happening now?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this briefly, but the situation in the Mekong has only gotten actually much worse. There are people who study, the water levels across this waterway every week. Brian Eiler at Stimson Institute, if anybody's interested to follow him, he has this like really good update. But it really just gets more alarming and more urgent every week in terms of the rainfall levels and the water levels are just like dipping and dipping, which is obviously making it very hard for people to fish and survive off the river. The other major thing I think that's happened when it's come to Laos is that basically, effectively, China controls their whole electricity grid now because they're so in debt. And I mentioned that the pandemic has totally changed the fate of this region, right? I mean, more than any, the countries of Vietnam, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, obviously, they were all very, very dependent on Chinese tourism and tourism in general, but Chinese tourism. And these countries are now ravaged by COVID, look to be locked in for a very long time, and there's no other sort of revenue streams, which make them turn, much more to this hydropower and dam building as kind of a solution. And it's just a vicious cycle, right? So it's actually even more kind of urgent crisis. I think the Mekong has also become a frontier with US-China as most states have in our world. But there has been, even in the Vice President Kamala Harris's trip this week to the region, there has been reference to those waterways also being kind of protected and becoming a major security issue for US-China. So I think there's a lot of interesting things to kind of watch in that space.
Yeah, the pandemic has really changed a lot of things around us, and which leads me to another question that's related to the Mekong. So the dams around, other than providing hydropower, how are the dams also impacting agriculture in downstream Mekong River? Do they result in, for example, rice farmers in Thailand not having enough water for irrigation or things like that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think that the main two issues are the water for irrigation and crop building, right? Because even when we were in Laos itself, you could see the banks were like totally dry where they should have been, where the river should have been, right? And that changes the soil and sedimentation as well. I mean, the water flow is not just about the water, but it's like what's in the water, right? And that is all like natural fertilizer for agriculture and so on. So it's that plus fishing combined, which is leading to this crisis because of the 60 million people who directly need that for their survival, for food and water security, basically.
Yeah. So what's happening in the Mekong not only impacts people in Laos or Thailand, but it's also impacting actually very important food. It's impacting food safety in the region, if not for Southeast Asia or even the world. So this is how this infrastructure story turns out to be a food safety and even climate story as well. Okay, so a question for Tina. So actually, Marion's question for Tina is actually the one that I have asked because so the child's condition linked to the incinerator. But there is another question for Tina that I think is very interesting. So the waste sorting situation in the two cities you visited, how do they compare with the rest of China? Do you feel that they were representative? Actually, that was also a question I had when you mentioned a good example in the villages you visited. Are they representative? Can it be scaled up? Can it be replicated in other places, the rural places?
I think it's not representative at all, but can be scaled up, which is why I think we chose to focus on these cases, is because they're trying to, in a sense, pilot what could be done in rural places, the kinds of participation or the kinds of procedures that you need in order to get people to separate their waste effectively in a way that can be recreated elsewhere. So I think I think the question of like the sustainability of these practices is something that I also think a lot about. So in some cases, like Chen Liwen will go to this village and teach people how to separate their trash. But then 1 year later, when she returns to the same village, maybe they're no longer separating it to the same degree as when she used to go door to door every single day. But then she found that the more successful cases were ones in which local governments were more invested. And like one county where they decided that this was a political priority for their county, and that they would kind of promote or demote or give cash prizes to like families and village governments that could show the largest like decrease in these numbers. And so I think the lesson that I took is that it is scalable, but the best way to actually do it is like policy and incentives, because there's no way to really go knocking door to door all across China.
Yeah, you could only do that for so long, and it takes Chen Liwen and a village chief to solve the problem with one village, but there are like hundreds of thousands of villages, and you don't have so many of them who could just go knock on doors every day. And so I almost forgot. You guys actually have some questions for me. And you have all listed the questions in beforehand. So I'm just going to choose to answer two of them now. So I think Tina asked me, what are the goals for Taiwanese companies and international companies in terms of having renewable energy? So and what's the best solution for the industry? So actually, the companies in Taiwan and international companies based here are faced with this challenge of decarbonization. And energy is really a key in case of Taiwan, because we rely 85% of our electricity. 85% of the electricity is coming from burning fossil fuels, half of them from coal, the other half from LNG imported from Qatar or Indonesia. So it's really, really very challenging, because many companies from Taiwan, they are really important, Apple, iPhone supply chain, including TSMC and other companies. They have all made promises to increase their use of renewable energy, some of them even to 100%. But a lot of there is a lot of demand for renewable energy, and simply there is just not enough. So we're just facing this conundrum of, we have this demand for renewable energy, but we don't have enough land to build solar farms. And at the same time, if we are phasing out nuclear, phasing out coal, we are also facing the challenges of unstable energy supply. So that's why I was also asking Shibani to think about, we need renewable energy, we need infrastructure, but how do we mitigate the impact for the environment? And maybe if we have time later, we can talk about that, because I do think it's a really huge issue. And what would I think would be the best policy solution? Unfortunately, there's really no quick solution. If we need more renewable energy, we could either expand on the offshore wind. And if we need a big solar farms, there's no other choice but to find suitable land. And you really have to take into consideration the environmental impact. So there has to be proper assessment, much like the dams on the Mekong. So, okay. And another question from Shibani, actually, she was interested in how challenging it was for us to get data. So in this story, we were lucky, because one set of the data, we got it directly from the local government, who were pretty transparent about these application cases. But the other set of data was more challenging. We had to work with a private company who specializes in satellite imagery, and they have access to a lot of historical high-resolution satellite images. And in the end, they even asked us not to include their name in the report, because they work really closely with a lot of local governments. So they are worried about angering the local governments if they know that they are working with reporters. So that's also something very interesting to share. And in Taiwan, it's actually it's getting better and better to get access to data. We have this open government initiative by the Digital Minister Audrey Tang. So people have more and more awareness about transparency and access to data. And we also have a lot of people who are getting more savvy in analytical tools, and people they just have more awareness now. So I do think it's getting better and better. And of course, we need professionals to know how to analyze and use the data. So we have another question from Christina. So it's actually very relevant for all the speakers. How do you think mainstream media could motivate your audience to take more climate action? That's a really big question. And I think we, as members of media or mainstream media, we know that it's always a struggle to balance what the market needs and what needs to be done. So do you Tina, would you like to start? Do you have any thinking on this? How can we inspire people?
Mm-hmm. The first thing that comes to mind is going back to something that Shibani also said earlier of showing the human cost of climate issues and environmental issues. So I feel that a lot of climate reporting, as it is currently, focuses on the statistics and the numbers and these very macroeconomic impacts. But if we can do more works, more like multimedia works, more like on the ground reporting, more amplifying the voices of people who are trying to do something, I think that's one way to try to make it more like relevant on a human level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think sometimes also like the issue of climate can seem so overwhelming to people, or it's like so big and like they don't know what to start and they don't know what to do. And I think it's just kind of like raising awareness, right, with like the small sort of community level things that are happening, that are changing, and that you can actually do to sort of make an impact. I think then it seems less like a giant crisis which is so out of our hands, and it's all like going terribly and there's nothing we can do to impact that or change that.
Yeah, thank you, Shibani. I think it also brings us back to one of the hashtags that Tina used, that it's solution journalism. I like that very much. So meanwhile, I would like to thank both of you. You really showcased really excellent multimedia journalism. Everyone, I recommend that you go look at and listen to Shibani's multimedia work. If you scroll down, you could really hear what's going on. You could hear the insects, the animals, you can hear the water, and you could also hear Shibani's voice. She was telling the stories, and you could hear the background sounds. So it was really a sensory experience. So I would like to conclude the session. Thank you both for participating. Thank you, Shibani, joining us from Hong Kong, and Tina joining us from Greece, out of all places. And we're looking forward to reading more stories from you, showing the impact to human lives and to the communities of all the infrastructure, all the development that we are doing in this world. And I would like to also thank Sopa for organizing today's event. Thank you, Christine. You've done such a good job getting everything ready. And I would also like to thank today's audience for asking really inspiring questions and for staying until the end. So,
and thanks, Kwangyin, for moderating.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Shibani and Tina. And with that, I would like to wrap up today's discussion. So please stay tuned for upcoming SOPA Media Insider webinars. I think there is one coming up in around 2 weeks' time. So remember to sign up for that. And I hope you have a wonderful morning, day, or afternoon. Bye-bye.